There's a table in this room no one dares to touch, someone whispered as the lunch crowd filled the restaurant with quiet clinks of silverware and low conversations, but one corner stayed untouched. Table 9, a perfect white cloth untouched water glass full, the chair occupied by a man who didn't look up. Daniel Whitmore didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to do anything. His presence alone bent the room around him. Servers avoided eye contact, managers reassigned sections, even regulars lowered their voices when passing by his table. Power didn't always announce itself, sometimes it just sat there still and undeniable. Emily Carter noticed it the moment she stepped onto the floor for her first shift, her apron still crisp, her name tag slightly tilted. She paused, not from fear but from observation, the way the air changed near that table, the way footsteps slowed, the way no one crossed an invisible line. "Don't take that one," another waitress murmured under her breath, not unkind, just certain. Emily didn't respond, she simply followed the manager's eyes when he asked, "Who wants table 9? Silence. No one moved, not a single hand lifted, not a single breath volunteered. And then almost quietly, almost like it meant nothing, Emily raised her hand. "I'll take it." A few heads turned, not dramatically, just enough to notice the new girl who didn't know better, or maybe did. She adjusted her tray finger, steady posture straight, and began to walk. The distance wasn't far, maybe 20 feet, but it felt longer as every step echoed softly against polished floors, heels clicking in a slow, even rhythm. She didn't rush, she didn't hesitate, she walked like she belonged there. Daniel Whitmore remained still, eyes on the documents in front of him, numbers, contracts, decisions worth more than the building itself. He spoke before she reached the table. "Coffee black, don't talk." His voice was calm, flat, practiced, the kind of tone that ended conversations before they began. Emily stopped beside him, not across, not behind, but exactly where she could see both him and the papers. Just for a second she looked, not staring, just noticing the watch on his wrist set 3 minutes fast, the pen aligned perfectly with the edge of the folder, the numbers slightly off on the page. Then she moved, she placed the cup down gently, no sound, no spill, and with a small precise motion turned the handle toward his right hand. Daniel paused, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough, a fraction of a second, where the pattern broke. He reached for the cup without looking and found it exactly where it should be. His fingers stilled, then slowly he lifted his eyes for the first time and saw her, not the uniform, not the role, but her calm, steady gaze. "Page 4, she said softly. "You're losing 12% on a wrong assumption." The room didn't erupt, it didn't gasp, it simply went still, as if something unseen had shifted, and for the first time in a long time Daniel Whitmore didn't speak. He looked down at the page again, and this time he actually read it. Daniel did not move for a full second, not a breath, not a blink. His eyes traced the numbers again, slower this time, not scanning but reading, the way someone reads when something feels off, and then his fingers shifted the page slightly, just enough to reveal the column she had pointed at. The assumption sat there, quiet, hidden in plain sight, a projection built on a rate that no longer matched the current market. He leaned back just an inch, the smallest break in posture. And for a man like him that inch meant everything. The pen in his hand tapped once against the paper, not impatient, not annoyed, thinking. Around them the restaurant stayed suspended, conversations paused mid-sentence, a server froze halfway through pouring water, even the manager stood still near the bar pretending to check receipts but watching. Daniel Whitmore did not look up immediately, instead he recalculated in silence. Numbers moved in his head faster than most people could follow. And then he saw it, not a mistake, not careless, but outdated, a variable no one had challenged because no one dared. His jaw tightened, not in anger, in recognition. When he finally lifted his eyes again, they were different, sharper, more focused, but no longer dismissive. "Explain," he said, just one word, but it carried weight. Emily did not step back, she did not step forward either, she remained exactly where she was, balanced, calm. "The growth rate assumes stability in emerging sectors," she said, her voice even low enough that it did not disturb the room but clear enough that every word landed. "But the last quarter dropped by 4.8%. If you adjust the baseline, your margin shrinks by 12.3. She did not rush, she did not decorate her words, she simply stated them. Daniel watched her, not interrupting, not testing, just listening, something he rarely did in rooms like this. "And the risk?" he asked. Emily's eyes moved briefly to the edge of the paper, then back to him. "It compounds over 12 months. You will not see it today, but you will feel it next year." Silence again, heavier now, not from fear but from something else, realization. Daniel looked down once more, then closed the folder slowly, his hand resting on top of it as if sealing the thought. He exhaled quietly, the first visible sign that something inside had shifted. "No one caught that," he said, not to her, not to the room, just to the truth. Emily gave a small, almost invisible shrug. "They were not looking for it," she replied. Daniel studied her face, not searching for arrogance, not expecting apology, but finding neither, just composure, steady, grounded, the kind that did not need permission. A faint sound of glass clinking somewhere in the distance broke the stillness, but it did not matter anymore. The center of the room had moved and everyone felt it without understanding why. Daniel reached for his coffee, took a sip, then set it down with the same precision she had used earlier, and then without raising his voice, without looking away, he said, "Sit." The word landed differently this time, not a command, not a test, but an invitation, and for the first time table 9 was no longer a place people feared, it was a place where something had just begun. Emily did not move right away. The word hung in the air, not heavy, not forced, just unexpected. She glanced at the empty chair across from him, then back at Daniel, measuring the space between what was appropriate and what was being asked around them. The restaurant slowly began to breathe again, but quieter now, more careful, like a room that had just witnessed something it could not explain. "I am working," she said simply, her tone respectful but steady, not an excuse, not a refusal, just a fact. Daniel's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted again, recalibrating. "So am I," he replied, and for a brief moment there was the faintest trace of something unfamiliar in his voice, not authority, not impatience, something closer to curiosity. Emily hesitated, not out of fear but out of choice. Then with a small controlled movement she untied her apron, not just enough to loosen it, not removing it, not abandoning her role, just adjusting it. She sat down across from him, her posture straight, hands resting lightly on the table, not defensive, not relaxed, just present. The distance between them felt different now, no longer divided by status but by something quieter, attention. Daniel slid the folder toward her, not fully offering, not fully guarding it either. "Show me," he said. Emily looked down at the page again. Her fingers did not touch it immediately. Instead her eyes traced the structure, the margins, the notes written in sharp, precise handwriting. "This model assumes consistency where there is volatility," she began, her voice calm, measured. "You are projecting stability in sectors that have already started shifting. The data is not wrong, it is just incomplete." She reached forward, then lightly adjusted the page, aligning it with the edge of the table the same way he had aligned everything else here. She pointed, not dramatically, just enough. "This line holds the assumption everything else depends on it." Daniel leaned forward slightly closer, now his attention fully anchored, not scanning, not multitasking, just listening, something he had trained himself to do only when necessary, and yet now it felt different, not strategic, not calculated, just real. "If you change it," he said quietly. Emily nodded. "You change everything." She finished the words, settling between them, not as a challenge but as a simple truth. A server passed by nearby, slowing just a fraction, eyes flicking toward the table, then away again. The manager stood frozen near the corner, pretending to adjust a stack of menus but not moving. Daniel leaned back again, but this time it was not distance. It was space to think. He removed his watch, placing it gently beside the cup, a small shift but deliberate, like he was setting aside time itself for this moment. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, not suspicious, not demanding, just direct. Emily's gaze remained steady. "I paid attention," she said, the answer simple, almost quiet, but it carried something deeper, not deflecting, not explaining, just enough. Daniel studied her again, not looking for credentials, not searching for proof, but for consistency. And he found it not in her words but in her stillness, the way she did not rush to fill silence, the way she did not need to impress. The room had returned to its rhythm, but table 9 had become something else, not a place people feared but a place they watched without realizing why. Daniel picked up the pen again but did not write. Instead he tapped it once, then set it down and said, "Finish it." And this time it was not a test, it was trust. Emily did not reach for the pen right away. She let the silence sit, not to create tension but to understand it, the weight of his words, the shift in the room, the unspoken attention that had settled on their table. She looked at the page once more, then at Daniel, measuring not his authority but his intention. "You are not wrong," she said quietly. "You are just early in the wrong direction." Daniel's brow moved slightly, not offended, not defensive, just engaged. She turned the page gently, aligning it again, her movements precise, almost instinctive. "If you adjust this baseline here," she traced the column with her finger, not touching, just guiding, "you do not lose 12%, you prevent a cascade that would cost closer to 18 over the next 4 quarters. Daniel leaned in closer, now his focus sharpened completely, the rest of the restaurant fading into background noise. "Show me the path," he said. Emily nodded once, then began. Not rushing, not performing, just explaining. "Your current model assumes a steady consumer response, but behavior shifted 6 weeks ago. The indicators are small but consistent. Regional reports, inventory turnover, even supplier delays, they all point to the same thing, instability that has not been priced in yet." She paused briefly, letting the idea settle before continuing. "If you realign your projection with the new pattern, you absorb the shock early instead of paying for it later." Daniel's fingers pressed lightly against the table, his mind moving through the implications faster than the words themselves, the kind of calculation that had built his entire reputation. And yet something about this moment felt different, not because of the numbers but because of where they came from. He glanced at her again, studying not her confidence but her restraint, the way she spoke without needing to prove anything. "Why did no one on my team say this?" he asked, not with frustration but with something closer to curiosity. Emily met his gaze evenly. Because they were hired to confirm, not to question. She replied, the answer simple, but it landed with quiet force. Daniel exhaled slowly, the truth of it undeniable. He picked up the pen again, this time writing a single number, crossing out the old assumption. Then he stopped mid-motion, his eyes lifting back to her. And you, he said, what were you hired to do? Emily's expression did not change. Serve coffee, she answered, and for the first time there was the faintest hint of something beneath her calm, not irony, not defiance, just clarity. Daniel let out a quiet breath that could have been a laugh, but it was softer than that, something closer to recognition. He set the pen down again, this time with intention. You are not just serving coffee, he said. Emily did not respond. She did not need to. The room had shifted again, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Conversations resumed, plates moved, glasses clinked, but table 9 held a different gravity now, not fear, not distance, something quieter, respect. Daniel reached for his watch but did not put it back on. Instead he turned it slightly, aligning it with the edge of the table, mirroring the way she had adjusted everything else earlier. Small detail but deliberate. Then he looked at her fully. No distractions, no assumptions, just presence. What is the next move? He asked, and this time there was no command in his voice, only trust waiting to be answered. Emily did not answer immediately, not because she did not know, but because she understood that the next words would matter more than everything she had said before. She glanced at the window where light reflected softly against the glass, then back at the numbers on the table, aligning thought with timing. You slow down, she said quietly. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in disagreement but in recalibration. That is not what people usually tell me, he replied. Emily gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That is why they miss it, she said, her voice steady. You are moving too fast for the shift to stabilize. If you push now, you force the market to react against you instead of with you. Daniel leaned back again, but this time his posture changed, less guarded, more open, his fingers resting loosely against the edge of the table. And if I do nothing, he asked. Emily shook her head slightly. You do not do nothing, you reposition, she pointed gently to a different section of the report. You reduce exposure here by 8%, not enough to signal concern but enough to create flexibility. Then you redirect into sectors that have already absorbed the volatility. You let the market correct itself while you stay balanced. Daniel followed her logic step by step, not interrupting, not challenging, simply absorbing the structure of her thinking. Something about it felt unfamiliar, not because it was complex but because it was clear. He had spent years in rooms where people complicated things to justify their presence, but she simplified them to reveal the truth. He tapped the table once, a quiet rhythm forming. Timing, he said. Emily met his gaze. 2 to 3 weeks, she replied. Any sooner you move alone, any later you follow everyone else. The precision of it settled into the space between them. Daniel looked down at the page again, then slowly closed the folder, this time not out of doubt but decision. He reached for his phone, paused, then placed it back down, the action deliberate, controlled, as if he was choosing not to act too quickly. For once the manager took a cautious step closer, then stopped again. Unsure whether to interrupt or observe, Daniel did not look up. He did not need to. The entire room was already responding to him differently, not with fear but with awareness. What is your name? He asked. Emily answered without hesitation. Emily Carter. Daniel repeated it once quietly, as if committing it to memory, then he nodded, not formally, not ceremonially, just acknowledgement. Emily Carter. He said again, this time with clarity. You just saved me more than a bad quarter. Emily did not react. She did not smile. She did not shift her posture. She simply accepted the statement the same way she had delivered her own, without weight, without expectation. Daniel studied her for another moment, then reached for the empty chair beside the table, not the one across from him but closer. Stay for a minute, he said, and this time it was not about business, not entirely. It was about something else, something he had not planned and could not calculate. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel Whitmore was not the one controlling the direction of the conversation. Emily did not move to the closer chair right away. She looked at it, then back at Daniel, not questioning him but understanding what the gesture meant, a shift not just in distance, but in position, the kind of shift that did not happen often in his world. She stood for a brief second longer, as if deciding where she belonged in that moment. Then she stepped around the table and sat where he had indicated, not across from him, not serving him, but beside him, close enough to see the details he had been studying all along. The room noticed it, not loudly, not openly, but in small glances, in the slowing of movement, in the quiet awareness that something had changed. Daniel did not speak immediately. He adjusted the folder once more, aligning it with the edge of the table, mirroring her earlier movements unconsciously. Then he rested his hands together, his fingers loosely interlocked, not the posture of a man issuing orders but of someone considering. You said 2 to 3 weeks. He began, his voice lower, now more measured. What happens after that? Emily's gaze followed the line of the table, then lifted slightly, as if she could already see beyond the numbers. After that the market settles into a new pattern, she said, and most People will call it unexpected even though the signs were always there. Daniel gave a faint nod, recognizing the truth in that not just in business but in people and decisions and consequences that arrived quietly long before they were noticed. And me? He asked, turning his head just enough to look at her directly. Where am I in that pattern? Emily did not hesitate. That depends on whether you are willing to look early or wait like everyone else, she replied. Daniel held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, not in dismissal but in thought. The question had not challenged him, it had redirected him, and that was rarer than any deal he had ever closed. A server approached slowly, then stopped a few feet away, unsure whether to interrupt. Daniel noticed without turning. Give us 5 minutes, he said calmly, and the server nodded quickly, stepping back, the authority in his voice still there but different now, not sharp, not dismissive, just clear. Emily noticed the shift, not reacting to it but registering it the way she registered everything else. Daniel reached for his phone again. This time, he unlocked it, his thumb hovering over the screen for a second before he placed it back down without making a call. The decision quiet but deliberate. I built everything by moving faster than everyone else, he said, not as a statement of pride but as a fact. Emily nodded slightly. And now you are at a point where moving first is not the same as moving right, she answered. Daniel let out a slow breath, the kind that carried weight not from pressure but from realization. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes moving across the room, not seeing the people but seeing the pattern, the flow, the timing, the small shifts he had ignored for too long. When his gaze returned to her, it was no longer assessing, it was understanding. You are not supposed to be here, he said quietly. Emily's expression remained calm. I am exactly where I am supposed to be, she replied, and there was no challenge in her voice, no defense, just certainty. Daniel studied her one more time, then gave a small nod, not in agreement, not in conclusion, but in recognition of something he could not yet define. The noise of the restaurant returned gradually. Conversations resumed, movement picked up, but table 9 held its stillness, a center that no longer intimidated but commanded attention in a different way. Daniel reached for his watch again, turning it slowly between his fingers before placing it back on his wrist, this time aligned perfectly with the second hand ticking forward, not rushed, not delayed, just precise. Then he looked at Emily and said, "Tell me what I am missing." And this time it was not about numbers anymore, it was about something deeper, something he had built his entire life avoiding, and was only now beginning to see. Emily did not answer immediately, not because she needed time to think, but because she understood the question had changed. It was no longer about projections or timing, it was about perception. She looked at the reflection in the polished surface of the table where light from the windows softened the sharp lines of everything around them, then back at Daniel, her voice quiet but steady. You are missing what does not speak loudly, she said. Daniel's gaze stayed on her, not confused, not resistant, just listening. Everyone shows you what they think you want to see, numbers, confidence, certainty, but the real shifts are quieter. They show up in hesitation, in small delays, in patterns that do not match the story being told, she continued. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his attention narrowing, not because he did not understand but because he was beginning to recognize the pattern she described. You mean signals that people ignore, he said. Emily shook her head gently. Signals people choose not to see, she corrected, the distinction subtle but precise. Daniel exhaled slowly, his eyes drifting across the room again, but this time differently. He was not observing the space, he was reading it the way she did, the way he had not allowed himself to for years. A couple at a nearby table paused mid-conversation, their expressions shifting as a server approached. A businessman checked his watch twice within the same minute. A woman by the window stared at her phone longer than necessary. None of it meant anything alone, but together it formed a pattern, one he had always been too focused to notice. You built your success on control, Emily said, her tone calm, not critical. But control makes you filter out what does not fit, and that is where change begins. Daniel's jaw moved slightly, the truth of it settling in, not as a challenge but as a realization. He had spent years refining systems, processes, strategies, all designed to reduce uncertainty, and in doing so he had also reduced his ability to see what did not follow those systems. So I have been looking in the wrong places, he said quietly. Emily met his gaze. You have been looking only where it is comfortable to be right, she replied. Daniel let out a breath that felt different from the ones before, less controlled, more honest. He leaned back in his chair, his posture no longer rigid, the edges of his certainty softening, not weakening but expanding. The restaurant continued around them, but it no longer felt like background noise. It felt like information, like a living system moving in ways he had overlooked for too long. And you, he said after a moment, you see all of this while serving tables. There was no disbelief in his voice, only curiosity. Emily gave a small nod. It is easier to see when no one is looking at you, she said. Daniel looked at her again, this time not as someone out of place but as someone positioned exactly where she needed to be to see what others missed. The irony was not lost on him. He had built rooms where everyone watched him, and in doing so he had lost the ability to watch anything else. A faint smile touched his expression, not for show, not for effect, just recognition. I have been paying for insight in the wrong places, he said quietly. Emily did not respond. She did not need to. The statement stood on its own. Daniel reached for the folder again but did not open it. Instead he rested his hand on top of it as if grounding himself in the moment rather than the numbers. Then he turned slightly toward her, his voice steady but different now, less commanding, more intentional. If I asked you to keep looking, he said, not as a waitress but as someone who sees what others do not, what would you say? The question lingered, not as an offer, not yet, but as the beginning of something neither of them had planned, and for the first time Daniel Whitmore was not certain of the outcome, and he did not rush to control it. Emily held his question in silence, not stretching it, not avoiding it, just letting it exist long enough to understand what it truly meant. She looked at him not as a waitress being offered something, but as someone being asked to step into a different kind of visibility, the kind that came with expectation, with attention, with consequence. I would say no, she said calmly. Daniel did not react immediately, not surprised, not offended, just absorbing the answer the same way he had absorbed everything else from her. Why? He asked, his voice steady, not challenging, just curious. Emily's gaze shifted briefly toward the room, the movement of people, the quiet patterns unfolding in small unnoticed ways, then back to him. Because the moment I become part of your system I lose what allows me to see it clearly, she said. Daniel leaned back slightly, considering that not as rejection but as information. So you stay outside of it, he said. Emily nodded. I stay where I can notice what others filter out, she replied. Daniel's fingers tapped lightly once against the table, not impatient, just thinking. He had spent his entire career building systems, refining them, controlling them, and now he was being told that the very structure he trusted limited his vision. The idea did not threaten him, it interested him. Then what is the alternative, he asked. Emily did not hesitate. You do not bring me into your world, you learn to step outside of it sometimes, she said, the suggestion simple but not easy. Daniel's eyes moved again across the room, but this time with intention. He slowed his observation, not scanning for value, not measuring outcomes, just noticing the small shifts, the unspoken signals, the way conversations paused before decisions were made, the way people adjusted their posture when uncertainty entered the space. It was all there, it had always been there, he just had not allowed himself to see it. You are asking me to change how I look at everything, he said quietly. Emily met his gaze. I am asking you to look before you decide, she replied. Daniel let out a slow breath, the kind that carried both resistance and recognition. He had built his success on speed, on decisiveness, on being the first to act, and now he was being asked to pause, not to hesitate, but to observe. That is not how I have ever worked, he said. Emily gave a small nod. That is why it matters now, she answered, the words landing without pressure, without force, just truth. Daniel remained still for a moment longer, then reached for his coffee, taking another sip, slower this time, more deliberate. He set it down carefully, aligning it again with the edge of the table, a small act but different from before, not control but awareness. You are not interested in a position, he said, more as a statement than a question. Emily shook her head slightly. I am interested in staying clear, she replied. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, not evaluating, not negotiating, just understanding. Something about that answer shifted the weight of the conversation. It was no longer about hiring or offering or bringing her into his world. It was about recognizing the value of where she already stood. He nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement, not agreement, not conclusion, just respect. Then I will have to learn to meet you there, he said, and for the first time the words did not sound like a strategy, they sounded like a choice. The room continued around them, unaware that something fundamental had shifted, not in the market, not in the numbers, but in the way one man had just decided to see. Daniel did not respond right away. He let her words settle, not resisting them, not reshaping them into something easier to accept, just letting them exist as they were. The noise of the restaurant continued, but it no longer pulled his attention the way it used to. Now it felt layered, textured, filled with small signals he had spent years ignoring. He leaned back slightly, his eyes moving again across the room, but slower this time, more intentional. He noticed a man adjusting his tie twice before speaking, a server hesitating for half a second before approaching a table, a couple exchanging a glance before making a decision, each moment small, almost invisible, but together they formed something larger, a pattern that could not be seen by rushing through it. I always thought speed was control, he said quietly, almost to himself. Emily remained still beside him, her presence calm, not intrusive, not distant, just there. Speed hides uncertainty, she replied. It makes it feel like you are ahead even when you are not. Daniel nodded once, the truth of it settling deeper than he expected. He reached for the folder again, but instead of opening it, he turned it slightly, angling it away from himself as if releasing the need to return to it immediately. And slowing down, he asked. Emily answered without hesitation. It lets you see what is already happening. Daniel exhaled slowly. The shift was subtle but real, not a loss of control but a different kind of awareness, one that required patience. Instead of force, he looked at his watch, then paused, his fingers resting on it before he slipped it off again, placing it gently on the table, not as a habit this time but as a choice. The ticking second hand continued, but he was no longer measuring himself against it. A quiet moment passed between them, not empty, not awkward, just complete in its stillness. The manager finally stepped closer, clearing his throat softly, unsure of how to enter the space. Daniel did not look up. Give us a few more minutes, he said calmly, the tone firm but no longer sharp. The manager nodded, quickly stepping back again. Emily noticed the shift, not in the words but in the way they were delivered. The authority was still there, but it no longer pushed people away, it simply held space. Daniel turned his head slightly toward her again, his expression thoughtful, not calculated. You see things before they become problems, he said. Emily shook her head gently. I see them before people decide to ignore them, she corrected. Daniel allowed a faint smile to appear, not for effect, not for anyone else, just recognition of the difference. And what happens when people do ignore them? He asked. Emily's gaze moved briefly toward the window where light shifted with passing clouds. Then the problem grows until it can no longer be quiet, she said. Daniel followed her gaze for a moment, then looked back at her. The simplicity of her words carried more weight than the most detailed report he had ever read. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting lightly on the table, not guarded, not defensive, just engaged. I have built a life on making decisions quickly, he said. And now you are showing me that the most important ones might come from waiting. Emily met his gaze steadily. Not waiting, she said softly, watching. The distinction settled between them, clear and undeniable. Daniel sat back again, his posture relaxed in a way it had not been before, not careless, not disengaged, just open. He glanced once more around the room, seeing it differently, not as a space to move through but as something to understand, and for the first time in years, he did not feel the need to rush to the next move. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was, letting the moment unfold without forcing it, and that alone changed everything he thought he knew about control. Daniel remained still for a moment longer, not because there was nothing left to say but because for the first time he was not trying to fill the space. His eyes moved slowly across the room again, but now each detail stayed with him longer. The rhythm of footsteps, the pause before a decision, the subtle shift in posture when uncertainty entered a conversation. It all felt clearer, not louder, just more visible. He reached for his phone again, this time not out of habit but with intention. He unlocked it, scrolled briefly, then stopped, his thumb hovering over a contact name he would normally call without hesitation. Then he lowered the phone back onto the table, the decision quiet but deliberate. Emily noticed the movement but did not comment. She simply watched the way he chose not to act. Daniel let out a slow breath, his gaze returning to the folder in front of him. He opened it this time but differently, not scanning, not searching for confirmation, just reading each line with care, as if seeing it for the first time. I would have approved this in under 5 minutes, he said quietly. Emily nodded once. And it would have felt right in the moment, she replied. Daniel's eyes lifted to hers. And wrong later, he added. Emily did not answer. The silence confirmed it more clearly than words. Daniel closed the folder again, but gently this time, not dismissing it, just setting it aside. I have always trusted the people around me to bring me what matters, he said. Emily's expression remained steady. They bring you what fits the pace you set, she replied. Daniel leaned back slightly, the weight of that settling deeper than anything else she had said. It was not about their capability, it was about the environment he had created, one where speed was rewarded and hesitation was seen as weakness. He looked around the room again, but now he saw more than patterns. He saw behavior shaped by expectation, shaped by pressure, shaped by him. A server passed by quickly, almost too quickly, adjusting her steps when she realized she was moving faster than necessary. A man at the bar spoke louder than needed, then lowered his voice as if correcting himself. Daniel noticed it all, not judging, not analyzing, just seeing. So if I change the pace, he said slowly, everything else changes with it. Emily met his gaze. Not immediately, she said. But eventually people stop rushing to match you and start thinking before they respond. Daniel nodded, the idea settling into something more than theory, something practical, something he could test not through force but through presence. He reached for his watch again, turning it slightly, then leaving it where it was, the second hand moving forward but no longer defining the moment. And if they do not adjust, he asked. Emily's answer came without hesitation. Then you learn who was only moving fast and who was actually seeing clearly. Daniel allowed a faint smile to appear again, not because the answer was easy but because it was honest. He had built his world on efficiency, on precision, on results, but now he was beginning to understand that clarity required something else, something quieter, something he had not given himself permission to value until now. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table, his posture open, his attention steady. You changed the way I look at this, he said, not referring to the numbers, not even to the decision, but to something larger. Emily did not respond. She did not need acknowledgement. She had never asked for it. Daniel studied her one more time, then nodded once, a quiet sign of respect, not formal, not performative, just real. Finish your shift, he said calmly. Do not change anything about how you work. Emily gave a small nod, standing up slowly, returning the chair to its place with the same precision she had shown in everything else. She adjusted her apron once more, not tightening it, not loosening it, just aligning it. Then she stepped back into the rhythm of the room, her presence blending in. Again, unnoticed by most but not by him, Daniel remained seated, his gaze following her for a brief moment before returning to the table. But this time the table was not the center anymore, the room was, and for the first time in years, he was not ahead of it. He was finally seeing it as it was. Emily moved through the restaurant the same way she always had, steady, quiet, precise, but now Daniel noticed the difference not in her actions but in how the room responded to them. She was still just a waitress to everyone else, carrying plates, refilling glasses, adjusting details no one else saw, but to him she had become something else, not elevated, not separate, just clear. He watched as she approached another table, her posture relaxed, her movements efficient. She placed a glass down, then subtly rotated it toward the guest's dominant hand, the same small action she had done for him earlier. The guest did not notice consciously, but their shoulders relaxed just slightly, as if something had aligned without effort. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes following patterns instead of outcomes. For the first time, he was not thinking about the next deal, the next call, the next decision. He was watching the present unfold without rushing it. A group at the corner table hesitated before ordering, exchanging glances, uncertain. Emily did not interrupt. She waited 1 second longer than expected, then stepped forward. At exactly the moment their hesitation shifted into readiness, the order came smoothly, no confusion, no correction. Daniel noticed the timing, not forced, not delayed, just right. He picked up his phone again, this time opening his calendar, rows of meetings, tightly packed decisions, layered back to back, no space, no pause. He stared at it for a moment, then slowly began moving things, not canceling, not abandoning, just creating space, small gaps between conversations where none had existed before, each movement deliberate, not reactive. He paused after the third adjustment, then locked the phone and set it aside. The change felt unfamiliar but not uncomfortable, just different. The manager approached cautiously again, stopping at a respectful distance. Mr. Whitmore, is everything all right? He asked. Daniel turned his head slightly, acknowledging him with a calm nod. Yes, he said simply, then after a brief pause added, actually better than expected. The manager blinked, slightly surprised, then nodded, stepping back, unsure of what had changed but aware that something had. Daniel's attention returned to the room. Emily passed by his table again, not stopping, not acknowledging him directly, just moving within her rhythm. And yet there was a quiet awareness between them, not spoken, not signaled, just understood. He watched as she handled a minor mistake at another table, a wrong order delivered not with apology first but with correction. She adjusted the plate calmly, then spoke a single sentence to the kitchen staff, her tone steady, not defensive, not urgent. The situation resolved before it could grow. Daniel noticed the sequence, not the outcome, action first then explanation, not the other way around. He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table, the realization settling deeper. This was not about intelligence alone, it was about clarity, about seeing without distortion, about acting without noise. His gaze shifted to the folder still resting unopened. He did not reach for it, instead he let it remain where it was, no longer the center of his attention. For years, he had believed control meant staying ahead of everything. Now he was beginning to understand that real control might come from being fully present within it. A quiet moment passed, then he reached for his watch again, adjusting it on his wrist, not to check the time but to feel its weight, align, steady, consistent. He looked once more across the room at Emily as she disappeared briefly into the kitchen, then back at the space around him, the same restaurant, the same table, the same world, but nothing felt the same anymore. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel Whitmore was not preparing for what came next. He was paying attention to what was already here. The door to the kitchen swung open and Emily stepped back onto the floor carrying 2 plates, her pace unchanged, her expression the same, but Daniel noticed something new, not in her, but in how the space responded to her. The path in front of her cleared just slightly, conversations adjusted by half a second without anyone realizing why. She moved through it, not commanding attention, not avoiding it, simply aligned with it. He watched as she delivered the plates, setting them down with quiet precision, adjusting a fork by less than an inch before stepping back. The guest nodded faintly, not aware of what had been corrected, only that something felt right. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his fingers resting loosely against the edge of the table. The world around him no longer rushed past him, it unfolded in layers, each one revealing something he had overlooked for years. A man near the entrance hesitated before sitting down, glancing around as if unsure where he belonged. A hostess smiled but spoke too quickly, and the man nodded without fully understanding. Emily Approached not immediately, not late, but exactly when his hesitation shifted into confusion, she slowed her pace just enough, her voice softer than the surrounding noise, her words measured. The man's shoulders relaxed within seconds. Daniel saw it clearly, not service, not efficiency, but calibration, the ability to meet a moment as it was instead of forcing it into expectation. He reached for the folder again, this time opening it slowly. The numbers inside had not changed, but his understanding of them had. The margins he once trusted now felt rigid. The projections that had seemed precise now felt incomplete, not wrong, just limited. He picked up the pen, then paused, his hand hovering over the page before lowering it again. He did not need to correct everything at once, he only needed to see what was there. A group of executives entered the restaurant, their voices slightly louder than necessary, their movements faster than the room around them. Daniel recognized the pattern immediately, the same one he had carried for years, urgency disguised as importance. He watched as they took their seats, speaking over one another, decisions already forming before questions were asked. Emily approached their table, but did not match their pace. She did not speed up, she did not interrupt, she waited one beat longer than expected. Then spoke one clear sentence, their voices lowered, not because she forced them to, but because she did not follow their urgency. Daniel noticed the shift instantly, not dramatic, not obvious, but real. He leaned forward slightly, his attention narrowing not on her alone but on the interaction itself. This was what she had meant, not controlling the room, not reacting to it, but aligning with it in a way that changed its rhythm without resistance. He closed the folder again, this time with certainty, not avoidance but clarity. He reached for his phone, unlocking it and opening the same contact he had hesitated over before. His thumb hovered for a moment, then he typed a single message: reschedule the meeting, move it to next week, allow time for review. No explanation, no justification, just a decision shaped by awareness instead of speed. He sent it and set the phone down, the action quiet but significant, the first of many changes he had not planned. Emily passed by his table again, this time their eyes met. Briefly, no signal, no acknowledgement, just recognition, a shared understanding that did not need words. Daniel leaned back once more, his posture no longer defined by control but by presence. The room continued to move, but he was no longer chasing it, he was within it, seeing it clearly for the first time, and in that clarity he realized something simple but undeniable: nothing had changed except the way he was looking. And that had changed everything. The restaurant began to empty slowly, not abruptly, not noticeably, just a gradual shift in energy as lunch hours softened into something quieter, the sharp edges of conversation fading into a steady hum. Daniel remained seated at table 9, but the table no longer carried the same weight. It was not a place people avoided anymore, it was simply a place where someone had chosen to see differently. His hands rested loosely on the table, no folder, no phone, no urgency, just stillness that did not feel like waiting, it felt like awareness. Emily moved through the final stretch of her shift, clearing tables, resetting glasses, aligning chairs, her pace unchanged, her presence steady. She did not look toward him again, not because she was avoiding him, but because there was nothing left to confirm. The moment had already done its work. Daniel watched her one last time. Not following her movements but understanding them, the quiet precision, the absence of excess, the clarity in every small decision. He reached for his watch again, not to check the time but to feel its rhythm, steady, consistent, no longer something to chase, just something that moved forward whether he rushed or not. He stood up slowly, not with the sharp intention he was known for but with a calm that felt unfamiliar and yet natural. He adjusted his jacket, not out of habit but alignment, then placed a few bills on the table, more than necessary but without display, without pause. He did not wait for acknowledgement, he did not call her name, instead he stepped away from the table, moving through the restaurant the same way she had earlier, not hurried, not delayed, just present. The manager glanced toward him, expecting a signal, a word, something, but Daniel simply nodded once and continued walking. The door opened with a soft sound as he stepped outside, the air cooler, quieter, the city moving at its usual pace, cars passing, footsteps echoing, distant conversations blending into a rhythm he had always matched without question. Now, he stood still for a moment, just one moment longer than he ever would have before, and watched a man across the street pause before crossing, adjusting his path as another pedestrian shifted direction. A small moment unnoticed by most but clear to him now, patterns within patterns, decisions within hesitation. He exhaled slowly, not releasing tension but acknowledging something he had not allowed himself to feel in years: space, not empty space but space to see, to think, to notice without forcing an outcome. Inside the restaurant, Emily finished resetting the last table, her hands smoothing the cloth, aligning the edge with quiet precision. She paused briefly, not looking toward the door but sensing the absence of something that had changed the room earlier. Then she picked up her tray and moved on her shift, not ending with a moment but continuing as it always did, steady, quiet, unnoticed by most but not without impact. Daniel turned slightly, his gaze lifting from the street ahead to the reflection in the glass behind him, the restaurant visible but distant now. He did not rush forward, he did not reach for his phone, he simply stood there for A second longer, letting the world move without needing to control it, and then with a calm step forward, he walked into it differently than before, not faster, not slower, just aware. And somewhere behind him, a table that once held silence now held something else, a quiet reminder that power was never about being the loudest in the room, it was about seeing what everyone else had already decided to ignore.